I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. I'm going to tell you how this story is played out in the last year, but then I want to go to the beginning, because the entrepreneurial journey of Andres Moreno, founder and CEO of Open English, is a truly extraordinary one. I've been on the board of the company for a long time. We first invested in the company in the seed round we led in 2011, so we've been investors for 12 years. Andres filed his S1 in December of 2021, and it is still sitting in the SEC docket because, as we all know, early 2022 was not great for IPOs. So this is a journey that began very humbly, has continued on with incredible tenacity and grit, and I think there are a lot of amazing lessons for people in this room for how Andres has navigated this as employee number one and founder all the way to today, leading a company of 2,000 employees and globally distributed. So just to tell you a little more about the early parts of this story, Andres had his childhood friend and technical co-founder Wilmer move into his Caracas, Venezuela apartment with him in 2006 to launch the company. So it's a 17-year overnight success. and Andres, from Venezuela, started poking around to fundraise and raised what we would call today a pre-seed round while still in Venezuela, while all of his customers were in Venezuela. Raised a $3 million pre-seed round, which is pretty extraordinary. And then we invested in a $4 million seed round, as I said, in 2011. And then just to give you what happened, after our seed round in 2011, he raised $43 million a year later from Insight and Redpoint, and then $65 million less than a year later from TCB. And so within this 24-month period, raised over $120 million and took what had been a Venezuelan-only, very niche English language learning platform into a global powerhouse. And then things got really interesting. So before we get to the messy middle, let's talk about the beginning. And I think since people in this room are at that inflection point, early stage, and hoping to see that hockey stick that you saw in that moment of 2011, 2012, 2013, like, tell us, what were the early decisions you made that led to that hockey stick? And then we'll talk about, as I said, the messy middle. But like, give us those early strategic, tactical decisions that you feel like got you to that point of really nailing product market fit.
First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here, to meet some of you last night at dinner. And I've known now Jeff and Chip and the team for, gosh, about 12 years. So it feels like really a family that's been great. So you couldn't find more supportive long-term investors, I think. And we'll get to the messy middle and where we are now, but we've definitely had our fair share of ups and downs, and it's great to have investors that are there with you every step of the way. So to your question, to answer that, so we created, well, first of all, just to contextualize, so we have now 22 developers, right, that are coming to my student apartment in Caracas, Venezuela, to program. And at the time, we didn't have money for salaries, but we did have this great lady that we knew that cooked amazing food. And so it was Venezuelan food at A-Plus, right? And we were co-located next to the engineering school, so everybody knew that they could get in at A-Plus at the end of their shift. So they would come by. We had a Nintendo Wii, which was great fun, at the time. And so they would like have an play Nintendo with us, and then they say, hey man, can you like code a little for us and help us out? So we ended up having like this community of people that would just come in, to my apartment every day and code. And we were raising, as I was spending part of my time in Venezuela, part of my time flying to the US to fundraise. Venezuela at the time, even now, but definitely 15 years ago, there was no venture capital space to speak of, as you can imagine. And I had read on some blogs that there was like these angel investors that would invest in your company. So I had like a few American Airlines miles and I think $1,000 left in my bank account. So I took a flight to San Francisco and started passing around the hat to raise money, and then all that money would get funneled back to try to keep the operation going. So in that context, and with a lot of effort, we created our MVP, and we created this English learning platform where students could connect with the teacher, and they could teach you online. And we thought that was going to be very disruptive to the brick and mortar schools, which is ultimately what we saw as our competition. All that as a thesis turned out to be correct, but when we first started marketing this, and we knew nothing about marketing. By the way, back then, this is going to make me sound really old, I guess, but like Facebook wasn't even really around, so like they weren't really selling ads, so you could market on like banner ads. We were like buying Yahoo banner ads, and guess what? People are clicking on these ads, getting to our page, and no one was buying, right? So after all this work, having raised around $700,000, which is like all the money in the world, all this pressure, every month living, paycheck to paycheck there, and we launched it, and it was like nothing happened, right? And so that was probably one of the toughest times. And then we started figuring out, and to your question about decisions we made, so we started trying to call all of our customers. And we're like, why aren't they buying? So we actually came up with the idea of having like a lead form, and so we could capture their information, because clearly it wasn't like translating, getting to a landing page, shopping cart money, right? So I literally started like calling every one of our leads. And then I realized a couple things. One is that people didn't really understand what we were doing. I mean, remember this lady asking me like, are the teachers inside the computer teaching you? And it's like, are they real people? So it's like, oh wow. So people didn't really understand how this was different than a YouTube video, right? And all of our value proposition is that we have native English speaking teachers that are live, right? It was this unlimited live instruction. Nobody really understood that. They thought it was a YouTube video. So I think understanding that insight and understanding that people didn't really trust our brand as well. It's like, I've never heard of you guys before. I'm not going to pay you guys $500, right? And then also understanding that people, at least in Latin America, and especially at the time, were very distrusting of payment systems. So they weren't. I mean, I see some Latin American heads in the crowd, nodding. And so they're like, this concept of giving you a credit card online just was not going to fly. On the phone, if you spend 10 minutes with them and you explain the service, and you contextualize it and told them what it was about, and then you could get their credit card. And I started closing sales myself. And I'm like, okay, well this is pretty nice. And and then we ended up buying these 3 different phone lines, and you had everybody just calling and making sales, and that worked. It was like a page thing. So we made 2 decisions. One was we need to sell over the phone. And today, so you get a sense, I mean, we generate just in Latin America, like 3.5 million leads from all of our landing pages and campaigns a year, and we call 3.5 million people back, right? So we have big call centers all over the world, and that model, what started with 2 phones, in my apartment, turned into an actual business model that was quite valuable. And to this day, we've never gotten just a landing page as much as we wanted, because there's a lot of complexity to running, thousands of people in a call center. But as much as there's nothing like a 5-10 minute conversation with our emerging market customers to explain the product, explain the cost, and then be able to close. So I think that was one big learning. And then the other big thing that changed our trajectory, and I'll pass it back to you, Jeff, is TV. So if some of you are, and I know I met some of you last night, my friend back there said he grew up watching our TV ads, which made me feel really old. We decided to get on television, and which was crazy right at the time, being on. But we thought hey, if we're on TV, people are going to know we're legit, right? Our customers are going to be like, yeah, those are the TV people, and there weren't any English schools advertising on TV at the time, or internet companies for that matter. So that was kind of interesting. We went to this TV station. We did a rev share with them. They're like, okay, we're going to run your ads. You're going to show up with 2 ads in 2 days. And we're like, great. And then we got home. We're like, okay, who here knows how to make a TV ad? And we're like, we don't have any money. So we did these remember the Mac versus PC commercials? That there was 2 characters. We were like, let's do that. So we did 2 characters. I was one of the characters because we didn't have money for actors, right? So I was this proud. I was the character that spoke perfect English and that had, was bilingual, had a job, was successful. And the other character, a friend, was basically the guy that would just butcher every sentence, and but he was proudly butchering every sentence and going to an offline school. So we made these very funny commercials that became sort of part of Latin American pop culture. And to this day, I'm not able to travel to Latin America, but now we're a 9 out of 10 brand recognition in the region, and some of these funny phrases and lines that get shouted at me at airports and stuff. So the combination of validation, it's oh yeah, I saw your commercial on TV with a 10-minute conversation, lo and behold, took us, started taking us down this conversion path, which by the way, same product, right? Same tech stack, same thing, same value prop, same price. It was just how we presented the product that we wouldn't be here if it had not been for changing that strategy.
Yeah,
right?
One of the funny lines in one of his early commercials is the guy who's not such a good English speaker says, "I speak Washington." And that's literally become a meme and a cultural iconic fact in people trying to learn English in the region. And so it's so amazing on this because if you had said to us in 2008, 2009, 2010, here's our strategy, we're going to make TV ads for customer acquisition and we're going to talk to people on the phone, every venture capitalist in the world would have said that's the stupidest go-to-market plan ever in the age of the internet.
Yeah.
And not that we want everybody here to make TV commercials, but I think there's a great lesson about trying different things and trying out new platforms and being a little bit non-consensus and being a little bit out of the box in your creativity and your thinking, and also to find ways to stand out. Maybe that's where I'd love for you to anchor, because last night's dinner we had this conversation about play. And certainly you found this way to create this playfulness around the brand and around the culture, and just maybe anchor us on how you came up with these non-consensus, out-of-the-box ideas and creativity that you exhibited, that your team exhibited. How have you created the culture?
Well, I think in the specifics of the TV ads, again, it was just talking to a lot of my friends that were hitting a glass ceiling at work. These were successful people that had gone to engineering school that just would not be the ones presenting to their boss in Cincinnati, and they could not be the ones that were going to sort of progress in the company. And there was a frustration to that and a feeling of unfairness on the one side, and there was also embarrassment. I would be in situations where they would have to, go to a job interview and they would ask you, oh, so now let's switch to English, and you could see them paralyzed and And by the way, these are people that, and some of you are not from the U.S. and you've had to go through the process of learning English, and you've gone to a school, you know how schools work, right? They make you memorize every single grammar rule on the planet. So all these folks were experts at the past participle tense of the verb to be, but when it came time to speak, they're frozen, right? And so I think just those insights from those conversations, why don't we just put this on TV, right? So, or literally this ad that Jeff is describing is, this other character going to a job interview, and then the interviewer switches to English and starts asking him about things, and all he knows how to say is the grammar rules and such, and everybody could just relate to that. And I think that just relating to them and not being afraid to use humor as well, because I think we're supposed to be a school, and schools back then were very proper, and they weren't I think using humor and I think something you said. If we would have had $1 million to go spend on the best advertising agency in the world, they would have probably developed these ads, but I don't think it would have been as memorable or as to the point or direct or insightful. So sometimes actually doing it yourself in a way, because no one is going to understand or should understand your customer, your pain point as well as you do. And I think once you understand that and you speak to that pain, it's almost like the sale comes alone. It'll just happen, right, if you really connect on the pain. So a lot of the phone calls are just connecting with them and understanding why all this frustration and being able to deliver a solution to them.
So let's talk about team and development, and then this will link into the messy middle. So, founding team, your childhood friend, everybody's in Caracas, you move to Miami, you raise money from US venture capitalists, and then you start building a company and find product market fit, raise more money, the cycle begins. You have refactored your team, by my count, 6 times, I think, over the last 15 years. And a lot of founders in this room are thinking about, when you get to these growth points, how do you think about refactoring your team? And yet your co-founder, Wilmer, is still technical architect and lead. So you've retained some early folks, but you've also brought in new people. And again, you've refactored as you've gone. So how have you thought about that? What are the sort of lessons for entrepreneurs as they think about identifying the people who got them here, can't get them there, versus the people who they've been able to nurture and grow organically with them? I'll get to you as a founder.
I don't think I've said this to you, but the last time I was at a Flybridge event, there was a panel of entrepreneurs that had created unicorns or were part of multi-billion-dollar businesses, and they all talked about this question. I remember listening to it because I was trying to make some tough choices on the team, and they all said, look, the people that get you from 0 to 1 million may be a different team than 1 million to 10 million, 10 million to 100 million, public company, et cetera. And that's very true. And sort of that made me feel okay, well, maybe I'm not the only one struggling with some of these challenges. And I think balancing, in the case of Wilmer, and in my case, my co-founder, I think you just have to be an avid learner, because a lot of the things that are getting thrown at you are different every day. It's you didn't go to school for this, you didn't study this, you don't know anything about this, and you're going and facing, experts, in your area, whether it be a competitor or a VC or whatever, you're talking to people that do this every day. So I think you have to, learn quickly and try to adapt. And if you don't adapt quickly enough, well, you probably get replaced, but you have to try. And as far as the team, finding people that are better than you at all these things and really not being afraid to hire amazing people at every step of the way. And then also, once their journey with you maybe is over, not be afraid to pull the cord. And I've sort of never regretted actually pulling the cord. I've always regretted not doing it soon enough. Because you always are sort of maybe more emotionally tied to some of the people, and sometimes when it just doesn't work anymore, it doesn't work, and you have to accept that and move on, and you have a tough job, right? You have to sort of make these decisions.
Take a minute about you as an autodidact, because that's one of the things I've admired about you as a leader. You've gone from this very humble beginning to now running this massive company, and it's very rare for a founder to lead it end to end, and we'll talk about some of the things that led to that, but like every time we hit a wall or we hit a topic, I feel like you master it very quickly. So what are the habits, and again, reflecting for the people in this room who are trying to go on that learning journey, what are the habits you've developed that allow you to, that autodidact mastery, even when you haven't come across these problems or these subject matter areas and you're lining up, as you said, against experts with decades of experience?
Yeah. Well, in my next life, I'd love to go to HBS and actually learn it the real way. But I not having had the chance to do that, I think, Jeff, it's just, I think my wife would say that I'm obsessive, and that I will, stay up all night for like 2 weeks, read everything about this, or I'll go to the gym and be like watching videos about this, and I'll be, so you just sort of like, just do nothing but, right, until you feel like you have a good understanding of it. I think Kiara last night at our dinner said something I like, which is to not be afraid to ask questions. Like, hey, I don't know anything about this, just explain this to me, right? And I think sometimes we just don't do that because you feel like you're expected to know. And I feel it every day, by the way. That feeling doesn't change. Like now we're negotiating a pretty meaningful transaction for the company, and all of a sudden, I have, on the one side, we're negotiating with a big corporate that understands the terms they want very well. On the other side, you have trying to make, find a solution that works for all of our investors that do this for a living, and you're thrown a, pretty complex set of terms. And by the way, you not only need to understand them, you need to be able to internalize them, understand them, improve them, negotiate them on both sides, and get to a good solution, and that all needs to happen in a week, right? So you have to get pretty smart about something very quickly, not having had the benefit of experience. And that's just, I think, that's the challenge, but it's also the exciting thing about being an entrepreneur. You wake up every day to new challenges. I never feel bored.
So like, let's talk about motivation, and then we'll get to the gym reference, because Andres and I have a very personal relationship and a very open relationship about life and health. But 17 years in, and you still have a huge amount of passion. And there have been times, I know, where you thought, gee, maybe I'll step aside and I'll let a professional manager come in. And in fact, we're very open to share with this group. We went down that path with a particular individual, and then it didn't work. And as we were sharing earlier, people remember the movie, George Clooney, flies in and, fires people for a living. I had to fly in to join up guys in firing this individual with a 10-minute meeting, and then flew back home to Boston. So, you've sort of taken these moments where you said, look, maybe I shouldn't keep running this thing alone. Maybe I should have a portfolio, maybe I should be doing other new things. But then you keep coming back to running this thing, and you keep showing an amazing amount of energy and passion for it. So how do you maintain that intensity? And how do you think about that portfolio versus single-threaded, navigation?
Yeah, there's a lot to that, I think. I think I'll put those into two separate questions: the sort of portfolio of doing different things all at once versus how to stay motivated with the one thing that you're doing. And on this last point of how to stay motivated, I mean, look, when you're, in my case, like I'm from Venezuela, I came here with $1,000, in my bank account, if that, probably exaggerating, some American Airlines miles, and like got here, and it's like, we've created all this value, and we're impacting now 2 million students. We have 10,000 corporate customers. You have 2,000 employees, 2,500 teachers that work here. It's like when I look back and just, by just watching what we've been able to do, there's just incredible motivation every day, and we have incredible investors that have stuck with us, and so there's like I never wake up feeling like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this. If I'm not the right person to do this, that's a different topic, right? But do I have the motivation to keep and and the commitment, right? Because like, there's just like, no, the thought doesn't cross my mind, right? This is just what we do, and we're going to do it right. And so I don't know. I just there's just by the way, there was never another alternative. It was like, you know, do or die, right? Literally, like if I don't do this, by the way, dropped out of engineering school in the 5th year to my parents' devastation. So I couldn't even get a job, right? This is this is the only thing I can do. So there was always like, I think not having a lot of options is a great way to motivate yourself, right? So it's
burn the ships.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we're gonna make this happen. It doesn't, you know, there's no going back, and it's not for lack of challenges. I mean, you get punched in the face every day, but you just like, okay, we get up again and do it again, and you know, it's just like rinse and repeat. And I'm not good at a lot of things, but I guess we are resilient, and that is a competitive advantage. And it's interesting over time to realize how many companies have shown up in our space with something bright and shiny, this and that, but like, we're just there, you know, it's like, we're just keep growing, keep doing it every day, and incrementally doing what we do, doing it better every day. And I think the accumulation of that resilience turns in, you know, great to great company, and that's who we are today.
All right, let's talk about staying healthy as an entrepreneur. Sheree made this comment about thinking about the whole self, and I mean, you have had some intense moments as an entrepreneur and some pretty challenging moments and very stressful moments. But you are today healthier than you've ever been. Like, I've seen your journey on this front, and I know you said you'd be very open about it. Maybe just share like a little bit about that journey, because I think a lot of people in this room, when you get the challenges that we get as entrepreneurs and go through the ups and downs, sometimes we forget to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, it's something I'm very passionate about, and we talk a lot about. I mean, like many of you, and I was talking to an entrepreneur last night. She was sitting next to me. She's the founder of Bold Voice, and I asked, like, so, you know, I don't know if you're here, but anyway, I asked, like, hey, what do you do outside of work? And she just answered, well, so, and she talked more about work. And it's sort of like, and I think when you're like an early stage entrepreneur, that is all you can talk about. I remember my dad telling me, like, well, you talk about something else. I'm so sick and tired of hearing about it. It's like, well, there's nothing else to talk about, right? It's like all you want to talk about. So that is, you know, 24/7, all you need to. So I think that obsession is, I don't know if it's healthy or unhealthy, but it's necessary to really create something out of nothing, right? I think which is something that, you know, only great entrepreneurs like yourselves can do. But it's also very easy to lose balance. At least it was for me. I mean, I was, you know, running through airports. You know, we had operations now in, you know, 20 countries. We have 7 different hubs. You're picking up whatever food you can eat. You know, you're sleeping when you can sleep. You're like, you know, you don't respect your sleep schedule. You don't think it's important. You're waking up early, doing dinner with the team late. You're, you know, and so you're not moving, and you're not really, you know, able to go to the gym and really have a routine. And all that led to me today plus 55 pounds maybe, so like 230, right, 235, and I was, you know, not feeling it. Forget about the weight, it just that I wasn't feeling good. I mean, I just was like, my energy was down. I felt like, you know, I couldn't get through the day. I wasn't happy with myself or my ability to get things done, and so, you know, one of these deep dives was like, okay, we need to figure out how to change this, right, as an entrepreneur. So spent like weeks doing nothing but listening to Peter Attia and learning about longevity and all this stuff, right? Like, you know, reading every book, and you know, so I can see some of you have done that. So, and then, you know, well, okay.
This is not a commercial for Peter Attia.
No, right? Exactly.
Oh, it is a good book.
It's a good book. It's a good podcast.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's like, okay, well, 4 pillars. You need to, you know, change the way you move. So I came up with a very detailed and precise sort of like workout routine that I do. You need to change the way I eat. So I came up with a very precise and specific, you know, diet and nutritional plan that works for me. You need to respect my sleep, which is culturally not something that an entrepreneur is supposed to do. You're not supposed to like say, oh yeah, I slept 8 hours last night. No, you're supposed to be like, I slept 4, and you know, here I am first in the office, right? So you're like, no, I'm gonna sleep 8, and you know, I'll wake up and I'll be a better human for everyone, right? So, and the mindset piece, which is the 4th pillar, which is you really need to stay motivated and not, you know, even in moments of anxiety or stress or pressure, you need to, but all that works holistically, right? I think if you're feeling good about yourself, you're feeling healthy, you worked out that morning and you ate, you know, great, and you slept, you know, your 8 hours, and you're feeling creative, and yeah, okay, then you can get punched in the face and it doesn't hurt as bad, right? So, whereas if you slept 4 hours, you ate like, you know, the wrong food, you didn't work out, you feel bad about that already, and then you get punched in the face and you're just like, I'm just gonna sit down. So I think, yeah, it all works together, and it's an important part of my life now.
Yeah, it's amazing. And, you know, know Andrea said this, but he recently acquired a business in Turkey to help launch in the MENA region. He recently acquired a business in India to help launch in Asia, particularly Southeast Asia. So 2,000 employees, globally distributed, 20 offices. There's always an email, there's always a phone call, there's always a WhatsApp.
Zero inbox is not a thing.
It's not a thing.
It's
a myth.
Yeah, it's a myth. You go to sleep like somebody, there's a new wave of people sending you Slacks and emails and WhatsApp.
So how do you, just like one more thing, I think compartmentalizing. Like what's the mentality you put to just say, okay, actually sleeping that 8 hours, actually going to the gym is more important than my WhatsApp right now?
Yeah. I think you're hitting on it. It's really being able to compartmentalize. Like when you shut down your computer, I try if I'm going to spend time with my wife or with my family, and I'm better at doing that now. I feel like in the past, like I was spending time with my mom and dad, maybe on the weekend, but I was kind of like checking my email and checking my Slacks and behind. And now I really like give myself, those are going to be there in 2 hours. Nothing's going to happen, most likely, unless there's an emergency, and they'll call you probably. But there shouldn't be an emergency every single hour. And the value of being present, like if we're actually spending an hour together and we're both on our phones, versus like actually spending an hour together and connecting and being there. I mean, the value that we'll both get, the connection that we'll both get, whether it be with a friend or your family or your spouse or whatever, it's just so different, right? So I think that re-energizes you, because when you come back to your Slacks, you actually felt like you got a break and you can look at it with fresh eyes. Otherwise, it's so easy. You can spend your whole day on the phone, right? So there's always going to be something to answer, always going to be something to do. So I think you do have to compartmentalize it.
Yeah, that's great. All right, speaking of getting punched in the face. It's 2021. We decided to file to go public, and people know this. When you file to go public, it's like a year, 18 months of prep, huge amount of effort, building the team, filing the S1, getting the SEC comments, reacting to those comments, filing the S1 again. It's December 2021. We complete all the hoops and jumps and everything else, and we file, getting ready to go public, ideally in Q1 of 2022, and then the markets collapse. Like, take us to that moment for you as a CEO, and hopefully everybody here will file to go public and have these amazing outcomes and amazing exits, but all of us know that the reality is there are setbacks, whether those are external factors or internal factors, things you can control, things you can't control. So, like, take us to that moment in your mentality and how you handled it.
Yeah, I think that year in general I don't think I've felt as anxious in a long time before that. And it was this combination of the tide was rising, right? So you see, like, you have every conversation with every entrepreneur next to it. Oh, you just raised $100 million, and this thing just happened, and this company just went public. Like, okay, well, we need to get our ducks in a row.
Get on this train.
Yeah, you need to get on this train, right? And then, and a lot of it, obviously, looking back, was artificial and not as real. But at the time, right, it seemed like that was the sentiment, right?
And also, I should just mention one other thing, Duolingo, which is the low-end version of Open English. Like, those are the two largest English language learning platforms. Duolingo
goes public,
goes public with great fanfare, and sort of all eyes are on Open English as okay, the next thing.
Yeah. And by the way, we had tried before that going public via SPAC. So we went through, talk about learning. I mean, if you understand SPACs, I still don't understand them. So
I thought we didn't go public.
So how are we going to make money? So I think that was interesting. You know, SPACs were like a great, exit vehicle there for, 9 months, right, or 12 months. And so it's like a rush to understand SPACs, and let's do that. And then we start having, meetings with investors who are going to anchor this, and like, when two of named investors that you would know, like, hey, you have a really good business, why are you doing SPAC? It's like, okay, well, maybe this is not the right thing for us. Just go public. So then, but that was, doing an S4, preparing for all of that, and by the way, the work that goes into that is different than an S1, and so you had to then revamp the team and the efforts and everything, and sort of, go to the S1 route. And then, of course, the market falls apart and we don't go public. And, of course, it's, some of it is disappointing, and it's like, wow, like you have to sort of re-energize yourself after that. But, time gives you perspective. I look back at all the challenges that we've had, and I'm so grateful for all of the challenges, all the difficult people, all of the, the things that, because they've
not all the difficult people.
But you know what, like,
I think of one or two.
Sure, but actually, I was having this realization the other day, because I was going through, some new challenges, and and I said to myself, like, I'm thankful for all those tough moments and all those difficult people, because they've given me the ability to, like, be able to be very calm and be, and have different tools in the arsenal that you can sort of use when things are challenging. And so I'm sort of you're grateful for all of that. And this is yet another one of those moments, right? And actually, I'm so glad we didn't go public, because imagine if our first 2-3 quarters of public life would have been, in the worst market ever. And that would have been, I think, more stressful, right, at the end of the day. If we had gone public, we had an April 15th go-out date. Had it been December 1st, we probably would have gone public, and then, boom, we would have hit a wall right after that. So I think that, everything happens for a reason, and I always am sort of glass half full, and for better or for worse. And if you work hard enough, you can sort of, that glass usually fills up. So.
That's great.
Yeah.
I want to open it up for questions for people who have for Andres. He's also going to stick around, but I want to create some space for audience questions. Yeah?
So I actually had a question. So I'm also not from the US originally. How did you learn to speak English so well?
Open English, obviously. No, I was, my father worked in international organizations, so as a child, I would get to move every 18 months, 2 years to a new country. He lived all over the world, from, Slovenia to Peru, interesting places. 3 of those years were in the US, so I actually did my elementary school in Maryland, and so I learned how to speak first in Spanish, and I learned how to read and write first in English, and so I was very confused by the age of 7. So. Yeah.
By the way, I think for those of you who feel this duality, maybe it's based on language or country or community, Andres' ability to code switch is just extraordinary, and I think it's a huge asset. I mean, you have how many employees in Bogota right now?
Yeah, half of our team is in Bogota.
Yeah, it's
distributed, yeah.
Over 1,000 employees in Bogota, where he's very comfortable, native, feels like one of them, and then he comes into a boardroom here in New York City and is incredibly effective and articulate, and that skill I've always just really admired. Other questions that we have? I have more I could do, but yeah.
Organization, how do you deal with different cultures? Because the culture in America is very different than LATAM, and I assume the culture in MENA and Asia, are going to be a totally different challenge.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I was sitting there in a Zoom the other day, and it was our international meeting. Where now we have we had our PMs for Latin America and Brazil and the U.S. Hispanic market and Mexico and Argentina, and they all have a set of challenges that is different, but maybe not as different. But then we have our Turkish PM, and we have our India team, and we're now launching Saudi Arabia and Vietnam, and so it was truly like the United Nations, and it was interesting. And what I find is that at least in our business, Santiago, the one thing that all of our customers share is that they're very aspirational, and we connect around the mission of the company of helping them be successful. And so actually we're talking about the same thing. I think although they're all sort of very different culturally in some ways, in other ways in terms of what we want to accomplish, what we're trying to solve for, there's a lot of similarities. And at least the culture of Open English is very collaborative, so everybody's sharing what works. And I think that's been a real asset where in fact, you asked me a question I didn't answer, but it's also spending part of my time working on other businesses. The same thing happens when you spend some of your time working on other markets, where all of a sudden something works in Turkey, and they're like, hey, you know what? We actually stopped marketing the last week of the month, because then our sales reps actually are more focused on closing the leads they already have. I'm like, oh, interesting. Let's try that in Colombia. So there's these little things that can become big things when you have a lot of different people thinking about it. Now, there are differences. I was mentioning this, I think, to Jeff last night. For example, we look at usage of our platform. And we've always in Latin America had the software. It's like, hey, you have unlimited access to native English-speaking teachers. And it was, and people, they study on average once a week, right? And then we go to Turkey, we put out the same offer, and they study 7x as much as our Latin American cohorts. And we're like, wow, okay, we're terrible students. And our India team is 20x. We're like, okay, unlimited doesn't work. Yeah, so there are definitely differences. Yeah.
Yeah. Go here.
Hi, thank you for the amazing story. I'm from Southeast Asia myself, from Malaysia, and really interesting to see how you're building a product for the emerging market. But an American company building a product for the emerging market. You yourself coming from a market, an emerging market as well. What's the experience like? That's the first question. And the second part of the question is like, what's the experience like building a company in 2006, almost pre-internet era, right? In a way, and building an enduring company that survived and thrived till today.
Yeah. Well, on your first question, great question, by the way, and we connect on that. I think being able to, our superpower, I think, is that we understand the pain of our customers. And there's a lot of other companies. I think if you're, not to discredit any background, it's just different, right? But I think if you grew up in California, you go to Stanford, and then you're trying to then go and figure out like how you build a product for someone that's sitting in Bogota or somebody that's sitting in Mexico City, and so it's a little more challenging, right? Whereas if you grow up actually experiencing the pain, and that's the pain your brother feels, and your uncle and your cousin, and you know all these stories and all that, if you let that be your superpower, right? That's why you're different and why you're, that's your advantage, right? You have some disadvantages for sure, right? But that's your advantage. I think if you can play to that, I think that's quite important. And don't let conventional wisdom, back to something Jeff was saying, sort of take over. Not because your other buddies that are sitting here in the U.S. think it's one way. Like, hey, maybe in your market it's really not that way, right? You have to try something different.
And actually, just if I may interject on that point, when we hired the grown-up management team, a lot of it came from these traditional Silicon Valley backgrounds, and they didn't have the cultural competence to be effective.
Yeah. And
when Andreas found executives who had both cultural competence and the technical skills, it's worked out much better.
Yeah, definitely. And it was a two-part question. Sorry, what was the second part?
Pre-Facebook and building a company so early before these modern platforms have been developed, just how you navigated that.
Yeah, well, so I'll connect to the question and answer. Today, so outside of what I do at Open English, I'm also I love being an early stage entrepreneur. And like you guys, I also wake up with a lot of different ideas every day. Some of those ideas fit neatly into what we do at Open English. So we developed Open English Junior, and now that's our second product line, right? And we teach kids, and that was a very different product and tech stack, and a thing that we were solving for. We created an enterprise business that's now our fastest growing category. We serve 10,000 corporate customers, and so on and so forth. Some of those ideas really don't fit neatly into Open English. So I've chatted a lot with Jeff about this over the years, and so I was able to find a model where I could help raise capital and find great management teams, because I know a lot of people that have already been through maybe Open English or in the ecosystem. You look at ideas, right, that we could all get excited about. You try to put all those things together, and I think the tricky part is that if you only know how to be a CEO, meaning you only know how to be on top of every number 12 hours a day, right, which is the way, it's tougher to support. So I've had to learn also how to support another CEO, another management team, while not being, as deep in the weeds as one would be. But it allows that outlet, and back to cross-functional I learned so much being part of other companies in other categories that are totally different, right? Because we have one of the companies that we invested in actually does health and wellness for U.S. Hispanic and Latin American audiences. And guess what? When people wake up Jan 1st and they want to learn English and lose weight, well, there's a lot of similarities in those two categories, and some of the insights in the weight loss category actually apply really neatly to language learning. And so you can see how you can actually learn a lot.
Great. So one last question here.
I'd love to learn a little bit about how you train and manage all your teachers, given that there's 25,000 of them.
2,500.
2,500, and how you create a quality experience that's consistent.
And to be clear, those are not the W-2 employees, so the 2,000 employees and then incremental to that, there's the 2,500 teachers who are more contractors.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We tried a lot of different models. Early on we would hire them, then they would be contractors, but now we actually are supporting companies that we hire those teachers through. So those companies, all they do is recruit and find and help us train and onboard those teachers, and we have some of those company partners all over the globe, because we also needed to have, we have a company in Singapore, another one in Latin America, another one in South Africa, because we have to cover, right, 24/7 the different time zones, and that's very demanding. And as we launch in India, we launch in Turkey, Spain, Europe, now you have these peak hours that are very different than the ones that would serve LATAM. In terms of standardization, to your question, we tried to come up with a method where it's very easy to onboard and train our teachers, so that we develop the content for them. So they're following a very specific methodology, they're operating on our system, there's a teacher portal where they know what they're going to teach that day, they know exactly what the class is about, they have the slides already done for them. So that way, we're not really a marketplace, right, where the teacher sort of decides every day how they feel or what they're going to do, but all of that is already there. And then we have something that offline schools don't have, which is the ability to listen to every one of those interactions, right? So we actually record every one of those sessions, we quality monitor a portion of those sessions, and it's like Uber, right? At the end of every class, like our students rate the teacher. And so, hey, like very quickly, right, in a week, you can gather a lot of information on a teacher and you know if they're excellent, you know if they're not that great, or maybe not good at all. And some of that is maybe that person isn't the right fit for our company. Some of it is maybe rethinking and try again. And some of it is like highlighting really great people. And some of the best then become our celebrity teachers. It's a little bit like Peloton, where then we put them on social media and people connect with them and they're very charismatic, and that's been a very interesting, you know, there are influencers now for the company.
When I was an entrepreneur, I had my CEO and mentor would say, you know, Jeff, the next 6 months are the most important 6 months for our company. And then he would say that every 6 months. And I think it's so true for you as well. Like our next 6 months ahead are going to be the most important in our 17-year history. I'm super excited to see what comes next. Thank you so much.
Thanks for all the videos.